Genghis Khan reached the shores of this lake, so did Tamerlane, so did the famous Qing dynasty, so did every empire that tried to control Central Asia. Because historically, Central Asia was one of the most strategic points on the planet. It was a place where the routes between West and East have always converged, where whoever controls a step controls a corridor between civilizations. It is one of the largest lakes in Asia, but for some reason it doesn't really capture headlines. And that is a disservice to the grandeur of this lake. This is Lake Balkhash. It sits in the heart of Kazakhstan, in the center of the Asian continent, and the region surrounding this lake has been continuously inhabited for more than 40,000 years. However, the lake is slowly fading in ways that almost nobody outside the region is talking about. So today we talk about the story of a lake that shaped empires, sustained civilizations, and it's now facing a threat that no conqueror ever posed. Today we talk about Lake Balkhash. Lake Balkhash sits in southeastern Kazakhstan in a region known as the Balkhash-Alakol Basin. It is surrounded on all sides by desert and semi-arid grasslands. It stretches roughly 600 kilometers from west to east in a distinctive crescent shape. Roughly in the middle of the lake, it reaches its narrowest point, only about 4 kilometers wide. Now this basically acts like a shallow strait. It's known as the Uzun-Aral Strait, and this strait is one of the most unusual geographical features of any lake in the world because it divides two chemically different bodies of water. Because the western half of Lake Balkhash is freshwater, fed primarily by the Ili River, which drains from the Tian Shan Mountains to the southeast and delivers enough freshwater inflow to maintain drinkable water in the western basin. Now, if we move to the east of this shallow strait, we find something completely different. Because the eastern half is brackish to saline, it's more enclosed with less freshwater input and higher evaporation rates. The more east you go in Lake Balkhash, the saltier it gets. Now, these two halves share the same shoreline and they're technically the same lake, but they are, in biological and chemical terms, two different environments. There is no lake on Earth of this size that exhibits this dual character. Balkhash is, in this specific sense, a one-of-a-kind lake. Now this anomaly is produced by the particular combination of its elongated shape, its varied inflow rates, and the arid climate that surrounds it. Understanding this duality is the key to understanding everything else about this lake, its biology, its history, and most importantly, the nature of the crisis it now faces. The Ili River is the primary source of Balkhash's fresh water, responsible for roughly 80% of the lake's total inflow. It originates in the Tian Shan Mountains of what is now the Xinjiang region of western China. It flows northwest across Kazakhstan for roughly 1,400 kilometers, and it spreads into a vast delta of channels, reeds, and wetlands before entering the western basin of Balkhash. While Lake Balkhash receives the majority of its water from the Ili River, I would argue that the Ili River is also its biggest weakness, because this dependence on a single river originating in another country and passing through an extremely arid environment is the source of Balkhash's greatest vulnerability. Because what happens upstream on the Ili determines what happens to the lake, and there has been a lot happening upstream. Dams, irrigation extraction, population growth, agricultural expansion in both China and Kazakhstan is reducing the flow of water that reaches Balkhash year by year. The Kapchagay Reservoir, completed in 1970 on the Kazakh stretch of the Ili, was the first major intervention in the river's flow. It stores water for irrigation and for the city of Almaty, and its filling in the early 1970s caused a measurable drop in Balkhash's water level. Now, this was just a preview of what further upstream development would continue to do over the following decades. The Silk Road, the ancient trade network, actually ran to the south of Lake Balkhash, roughly between the lake's southern edge and the Tian Shan Mountains. This corridor was the gateway between China to the east and the cities of Sogdia, Samarkand, Bukhara, and Merv to the west, meaning many of the caravans passing between the dynasties of China and the markets of Persia and the Byzantine passed through this narrow strip of fertile watered land between the mountains and the lake. The rivers descending from the Tian Shan provided water for those caravans. The lake to the north provided orientation, and for the communities along its southern shore, it was a fishery that sustained the oasis settlements that serviced the trade here. Genghis Khan's campaigns across Central Asia must have passed directly through this region. The Mongol armies that controlled this corridor in the early 13th century were drawing on the same geographical logic that every power before them had understood. Control the passage between the Tian Shan Mountains and Lake Balkhash, and you hold the artery of the ancient world's greatest trade network. Even after the great armies of Genghis Khan, there was Tamerlane, and then over the following centuries, the Kazakh Khanate reorganized the steppe into a different political geography, one centered not on trade routes passing through, but on the pastoral economy of the lake's shores. But perhaps even more interesting than the lake's historical significance is the lake's biology. Because, like I previously mentioned, the dual chemistry of Lake Balkhash produces two distinct biological environments within a single lake. The western freshwater basin supports a productive fishery. Balkhash has 14 native species of fish, of which the most significant is the Balkhash perch. Now, in the southwestern portion of the lake lies the Ili River Delta, where the river fans out across a vast wetland before entering the lake. It is probably considered the biological heart of the Balkhash system. The delta's reed beds cover an area of extraordinary extent, providing breeding habitat for dozens of species of waterfowl, nesting colonies of great cormorants and gray herons, among other migratory bird species. Now, the reed beds of this delta include a species you might not expect, because in September 2024, 2 adult Amur tigers were introduced to this region. This marked the end of an almost 70 years without tigers in the Ili Balkhash region. This reintroduction takes place because this region historically was home to the Caspian tiger. These tiger populations roamed the reed thickets along the Ili and the Sir-Darya rivers before going extinct in this region roughly 70 years ago. Now, there is further good news because the country of Kazakhstan is making an effort to reintroduce 4 more tigers into this area. The idea is to rebuild a sustainable population in their historic habitat. But if you reintroduce a top predator such as the Amur tiger, it requires the rebuilding of an entire food chain. So because of this, during the same period, 119 Kolans have been reintroduced into the reserve, along with 200 Bukhara deer, to make sure that the primary food sources of the tiger are also available in the same environment. Now, if successful, this project will stand as a rare example of large-scale predator restoration, the likes of which are extremely rare, especially in Central Asia. The unique environment of the Ili River Delta is also known as the Central Asian riparian woodlands, sometimes also just known as the Togzhan forests. The good news is that in 2025, along with the tiger reintroduction program, approximately 10 hectares of that Togzhan forest were restored, a significant step in the restoration in one of the most ecologically important environments in this region. However, the same cannot be said about the lake itself. Unfortunately, there are some shocking similarities between Lake Balkhash and the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea disaster is one of the most dramatic environmental catastrophes in Central Asian history. It is also almost exactly the template for what is now happening at Lake Balkhash. But here, it's just happening more slowly, less visibly, and without the same international attention. Because Lake Balkhash's water level has been falling since the 1970s, the total drop since then is more than 3 meters in the Western Basin. Despite long-term water level drops at Lake Balkhash, the water level here has actually increased by 32 centimeters in the first half of 2025. Now, this is because of the fact there's been a significant increase of water that has been discharged from the Kapchagay Reservoir during the same period, an increase of over 8 billion cubic meters of water. Now, we have studies that look at long-term water level projections for Lake Balkhash. One such study done in 2011 shows a trend towards a 30% reduction in surface inflow and an increase in evaporation by 25% compared to the norm, just further highlighting the high sensitivity of the lake's hydrological regime to both climatic and anthropogenic influence. The primary cause is the same as the Aral Sea: upstream water extraction, reducing the inflow into the lake. The Ili River, which provides 80% of Balkhash's fresh water, is under increasing pressure from two directions simultaneously. Remember I mentioned how the Ili River originates in China's Xinjiang region? Well, rapid agricultural development and population growth have increased water extraction from the river systems substantially since the 1990s. Irrigation for cotton, wheat, and other crops in the Xinjiang basin removes water that would otherwise flow downstream into Kazakhstan and eventually into Lake Balkhash. I think it's extremely important to point out that in the last few decades, the Xinjiang region of China has been home to the One Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically a giant Chinese infrastructure program. The project aims to transform the infrastructure in this region. And because of this, just in the last few decades, the population in the area has grown by over 20%. According to different sources, China diverts as much as 43% of the water from the Ili River, but China is reluctant to share data, calling this an internal affair. And within Kazakhstan, the Kapchagay Reservoir on the Ili continues to intercept a portion of the river's flow. Hydroelectric power generation and agricultural irrigation along the Ili's Kazakh stretch further reduces what reaches the delta, and eventually the lake itself. The combined effect of upstream extraction in China, reservoir storage in Kazakhstan, irrigation along the river's length, hydroelectric power generation have reduced the water delivery to Lake Balkhash to a fraction of its historic flow. The eastern basin is perhaps the most vulnerable, already more saline than the west and already less biologically productive. It is the part of the lake most likely to cross the threshold from brackish to hypersaline, a condition that will almost kill this part of the lake biologically. And then there is the urban story of Lake Balkhash, because on the northern shore of this lake sits a city of roughly 77,000 people, the city of Balkhash. This city is built around a copper smelting plant. It was built during the Soviet period. Now, this mine processes ore delivered from different mines in the region, the vast majority of which is copper. And as you can imagine, this is one of the most significant sources of industrial pollution affecting the lake on which this city sits. The smelter's emissions have deposited heavy metals like copper, cadmium, lead, and chromium around the city for over 80 years. Gases are also emitted into the atmosphere from this smelter. This includes dust that contains heavy metals such as copper, lead, and arsenic. The relationship between this city and this lake is one of exploitation and pollution, a pattern that has defined the Soviet and post-Soviet urban geography of this entire region. Now, speaking a bit more about the city of Balkhash itself, it really is a monument to Soviet urban planning. It has a grid of wide avenues and standardized apartment blocks. Its public squares and cultural institutions built on a template of a Soviet industrial settlement inserted into this harsh region by central planning rather than organic growth. Now, there are other smaller settlements along the lake, including the mysterious city of Priozersk. Located on the northwestern coast of Lake Balkhash, this city is home to an anti-ballistic missile testing site originally built in the 1950s by the Soviet Union. This site remains in use to this day. Interestingly, the city of Priozersk itself remains a closed city, meaning travel to this location is heavily restricted. There are other smaller fishing villages scattered throughout the coast of Lake Balkhash. These villages tell a different story. Many of them shrank dramatically after the Soviet collapse, when the collective fishing enterprises that sustained them were disbanded and the state support for remote settlements was withdrawn. Villages that had populations of several thousands in the 1980s now may just have a few hundred residents, the younger people having moved to Almaty or Balkhash in search of better economic opportunity. They left behind an aging population maintaining a small fishing economy on a lake whose fish populations themselves are in decline. Lake Balkhash, while not as well known as other lakes in Central Asia, really is a great lake. This 600-kilometer long lake once carried vast populations of fish. The deltas on its shores were home to tigers. But the once grand lake is slowly fading. Its fish populations are declining. Its water levels are getting lower. The one major city on its northern shore is slowly polluting Lake Balkhash. As development grows in the Xinjiang region of China and the need for water increases in the arid regions of Kazakhstan, Lake Balkhash fades slowly every year. The question we need to end this episode with is, what happens next? Well, in the short term, we know that Kazakhstan's first nuclear power plant will be built on the village of Ulkin, which is on the shores of Lake Balkhash. It remains to be seen what kind of environmental impact this project will have on the lake. But in the long term, the questions we need to ask are, does Balkhash continue to decline every year? Does it continue to get saltier until it reaches a place of no return? Or do videos like this help raise more international attention and create an increased political urgency to help save this lake? If we want to save Lake Balkhash, we need immediate coordinated action, especially long-term sustainable cross-border water agreements between China and Kazakhstan. The good news in all of this is what I previously mentioned. There are some positive strides being made on the ground, like the restoration of the Togzhan forests. In addition, the government of Kazakhstan is working with France to develop a master plan to help preserve the lake. But what the future holds for Lake Balkhash, well, only time will tell. So if you made it this far in the video, I'm going to assume you enjoyed the video. And if you enjoyed the video and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, why not hit that subscribe button? I try to make 2 or 3 videos like this every month, in addition to a ton of short form content. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if you have any ideas for future videos. And I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.